As it says, I'm Drew Schell. I'm the current Edgewood chair, and I just want to say how humbling that is. It's easy to say. It doesn't sound like much to say, oh, I'm the Edgewood chair. I didn't really realize until I was researching this presentation just what that meant. And as Jean mentioned, the legacy of Brenda Butner, as well as so many other people in this room and so many that aren't with us here this evening, have really put so much into protecting Edgewood and then trying to restore it. I didn't know that history until I put this presentation together. And I hope that this will bring back some memories for many of you. It'll probably be some new information for many of you, and I think you'll find it very interesting. So let's see if I can make this gadget work. Oh, yay. So acknowledgments. It looks like we're cutting a little bit off there at the top. See? So acknowledgments. I want to start out by saying thank you. There was a ton of source material that went into this, and it was challenging to try to collate it. I drew from a lot of different sources, so I want to thank those people. I hope that I thanked everybody. If I didn't, I apologize. Certainly, I thank you in spirit, if not in text. I also want to take this opportunity to say there's no way to fully cover a 25-year program in a single short evening like this. And so I've done my best to try to bring you some of the highlights, but there's so much more there than I could put into this presentation. So I apologize if I left out your particular part of the story. I did the best that I could. We'll just see how it goes. All right. As Jean mentioned, tonight's the Brenda Butner Memorial presentation, and I didn't know Brenda. I didn't get involved with Edgewood or CNPS until 2001, which was unfortunately several years after she passed away. But I did want to show a picture of Brenda. This was in 1987, Tony Corelli in the middle. Tony, do you remember what trip this was? Yeah, I looked at that and I said, wow, that's a long time ago. And is this Joanne Gigat? Is that who that is? Joanne Gigat, who is another person that I never knew. So I thank all of you and Brenda as well for all that you did for our chapter as well as for Edgewood. At the same time, I also want to take a moment to thank and remember Jan Simpson, who was a longtime stalwart Edgewood champion, a weeder, amongst other things. Jan unfortunately passed away very suddenly this past year and is no longer with us. We are deeply saddened at her loss. And so in addition to being a memorial to Brenda, I'd like to have this evening be a memorial to Jan as well. And it'll be interesting to hear some of the history, how all these names interweave. It was a fascinating experience and a humbling one for me to be a part of this. So, as an introduction, there's no way to tell this story without, as it turns out, telling the story of Edgewood as a whole and even of our chapter as a whole. So I first have an introduction. CNPS and Edgewood, it's truly a passionate affair. It's something that has gone on for almost forever, it seems like. Now, initially, you have to ask for some of the people who are newer to the chapter, why protect Edgewood? Why was it so special? Well, so many of us know why. This is just barely skimming the surface. 467 acres, over 350 native plant species. 1/3 of the park is serpentine soils at the surface, an incredible, valuable resource. Many rare plants, including 3 federally listed, as you see here, the penniquita, the dwarf flax, San Mateo thornmint, which was really, in some ways, the plant that saved Edgewood. We think about the butterfly saving Edgewood, but even before that, there was a time when it was really the thornmint that helped save Edgewood. Obviously, the butterfly, as I mentioned, I found this. I dug through so many old files, chapter files, county files, found some amazing things. This is a 3-page letter from Stanford trying, endorsing, protecting Edgewood and other properties, signed by Paul Ehrlich. You may have heard of him. He's a little bit well known. Amazing to find his signature just below a reference to saving Edgewood Park. Within CNPS as a whole, not just within our chapter, but CNPS as a whole, in the Fromentia, April 1984, an article on special serpentine places throughout the state, 16 profiled, one of which is Edgewood. This article was written by, it's spelled Susan, but it's pronounced Suzanne Somers, who is long-time Edgewood. She was the first Edgewood champion and dedicated much of her life to protecting the park. Wrote this wonderful article in 1984, before there was a park, or at least before there was an official preserve, endorsing protecting it and talking about why it was special. Followed in 1990 an article, 25th anniversary of CNPS at that point. That issue included chapter histories for all the chapters. And ours was compiled by Ken Himes, Gene Sorensen, and Bart O'Brien, who we mentioned earlier. Fully 40% of our chapter history in this issue is about Edgewood. It's about how special it was, what we've done there, what the battle is to try to preserve it. It's amazing how important it was to our chapter at that point. And it includes this great nugget, this one statement. A field trip to what is now Edgewood, led by Mabel Crittenden in April 1975. Foreshadowed involvement in a conservation effort that has continued to this day. Wow. 1997, CNPS publishes this fantastic, it's coffee table book, really. It's eye candy for anybody who loves nature, and basically covers botanically significant sites throughout the entire state. This beautiful 2-page spread just on Edgewood Park. So clearly important, not just locally, but on a state scale. Tony Corelli has left such an amazing legacy at Edgewood, including being the author of this fantastic resource, the Flowering Plants of Edgewood Natural Preserve. And I just want to point out the dedication that she left in that book. This book is dedicated to Suzanne Somers, Edgewood Sage, and to the memory of Brenda Butner, preservation advocate. If I get a little misty during this, you'll have to excuse me, because it's just amazing to see all this history and how it ties together, and to receive that legacy just means so much to me. 2008, Fromentia, an article about Edgewood County Park and Natural Preserve, how it happened. At this point, fortunately, we had a natural preserve. This article was by Carolyn Curtis, who's with us tonight, and told the story about how Edgewood was saved, as well as a little bit about even the restoration efforts that we'll touch on later. Really wonderful article. And that article, in many ways, was drawn from this document, the Edgewood Park Background Information, which was produced by our own chapter's Edgewood Park Committee, a very important group that was very active trying to protect and preserve the park. Lots of great names on that list. If you look at the people that are listed there, it's just a stunning catalog of stalwarts of our chapter for decades. Most salient for this evening, Brenda Butner, 5th from the top, and Jan Simpson, 4th from the bottom. We're both there. Now, the campaign highlights, now this lays out the whole gory history, and I won't go into all that. It would take much longer than we have time for, but some of the salient points in the campaign for Edgewood. Acquired by the state in 1967, the idea was to put a college site there. SFP, the college never panned out, but eventually there were ideas for putting a golf course there, initially under the SFPUC. There was this little brief, I was amazed, I didn't even know this, but apparently there was a proposal for a solar energy facility. Never happened, that ended up in Colorado, but I never knew that. The county acquired the park in 1979, still with the idea of a golf course. That eventually led to a lawsuit. Yes, we do file lawsuits. They don't happen very often at the chapter level, but our chapter filed one on the EIR for the golf course. That led to a settlement in 1995, or that should say 1985, apologize. Settled that lawsuit requiring protection of the sensitive habitats at Edgewood, but it was not done there. That battle continued for nearly another decade. And it wasn't until 1993 that there was a final victory. The golf course was permanently prohibited, and Edgewood was designated a natural preserve. And from there, a lot of really great work then ensued. We'll get to that later. So that's kind of the external history. That's the stuff in Fremontia. That's the stuff in articles elsewhere, books. But I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into our chapter history. And so I went into some of the chapter archives, especially the Blazing Star, our newsletter, Blazing Star archives, and found some really amazing stuff, including, I looked for that 1975 field trip, and I couldn't find one led by Mabel. But I did find a 1975 calendar at the bottom, March 15th, a trip into the San Francisco watershed, meeting at Cañada Road and Edgewood Road in San Carlos. Now, at that time, what is now Edgewood was considered mostly part of the watershed. That's only 3 years after the formation of our chapter, and there's already a field trip to what would become Edgewood Park. There was another trip that I found in 1979 that was led by Mabel to, at that time it was called the Edgewood Road State College site. Kind of introduced our chapter to it. And then 1979, what at that time seemed like a victory, the announcement of the purchase of Edgewood to become a park within the county park system. Note that that's reported by our conservation chair at the time, June Bilasali. You heard about her earlier and the legacy that she left. Amazing how so many of these threads have intertwined over the years. So it seemed like a victory, but then here we are in March of 1981. Golf course seems like a real possibility, and the chapter is trying to figure out how in the world, we've gone from having a park finally saving this wonderful resource to they want to make it a golf course. How do we try to prevent that? 1981, May, June, Rare and Endangered Plant Committee meets and focuses specifically on Edgewood Park and trying to document the rare plants there, figure out how to get those plants preserved and officially designated so that they can protect the site. So already this campaign is getting underway. Along the way, somewhere in there, I have no idea when this poster was published, but this is a photo by Suzanne Summers, a now legendary poster endorsing Edgewood County Park. And there have been many times we've referred back to this as a sort of a literal vision statement for how we want to see that landscape preserved. 1983, this was a pretty important issue right here, and I'm amazed by the chances of this. Almost exactly 30 years ago, November 17th, the general meeting, Edgewood up close. How did that work out exactly 30 years ago? Includes an update on the chapter lawsuit, which has now been filed, opposing the EIR for the golf course. Notice chapter elections at the bottom, nominee for chapter president at that point, Tony Corelli. The beginning of a whole wave of people. Bart O'Brien, vice president. That same issue announces the creation of the Edgewood docent program. This is something that we think has existed forever, but it was something that our chapter created in order to try to espouse the protection of Edgewood. I'll start on the upper right, March, April 1983. One of the first references that I found to Ken Himes in any of our chapter literature. This is thanking presenters at the January general meeting, the first ever members night, 1983. 1985, a chapter chair list. This was one of the first references that I find to Brenda Butner, appears as publicity chair. Ken Himes is running the flower show at that point. And in 1986, kind of a throwback for this evening that we're enjoying tonight, 1986, Bart O'Brien, as president, proposes the very first fall potluck. So it wasn't all just writing. There were obviously lots of field trips. I don't know all the people in these photos. Maybe some of you might remember. Winter 1987, though, field trip led by Gene Sorensen. It looks a lot like field trips today, doesn't it? We all go out, we crawl down, we look at plants. On the right, Edgewood field trip 1989. Does anybody know the person, the tall person, the gentleman on the right who's leading the trip? I don't know who that is. It could be, maybe, Jeff Caldwell, I don't know. Obviously, there's some more research to be done to really understand some of the history here, but it's still just great to see these field trips. And this is from that same picture I showed earlier. I wanted to show another one of these. At the same time that all of this Edgewood stuff was going on, obviously there were some really strong bonds being formed within the chapter. Am I in your way, Sally? Can you see that? I want you to be able to see that. This is the same trip that I asked about earlier, with a few more people present, in addition to Brenda, Joanne, and Tony. Ellie, I'm not sure which Ellie that is. Is it Ellie Giamosis? Okay.
I think that's up in
Tuolumne Meadows, okay. And Sally Casey as well. What an amazing trip. It had to be a really wonderful time. So, fast forward a little bit, though. There was a lawsuit, there was a lot of hard work, there were a lot of field trips and all kinds of really amazing work. 1993 finally all pays off. This sort of political gambit by one of the county supervisors, Ruben Barales, gets MROSD, one of the original funders for the purchase of Edgewood by the county, to amend their agreement with the county prohibiting a golf course from ever going in. Once that was taken off the table, the county really had no other choice but to designate it as a natural preserve, a legacy that we're all thankful for to this day. In the same issue, more Edgewood news. Friends of Edgewood is formed in 1993 to carry on the torch from that coalition that helped save Edgewood from being developed. And just above that, this little blurb, Thistle control at Edgewood Park continues. Ellie Hess. Where did that come from? I've sort of skipped past some of that because I want to go back and tell that story a little bit. But this is the precursor. This is how Edgewood came to be. It's such an amazing and important part of our chapter's history that I wanted to share it with you. But let's get to some of the meat. This is the real deal for the presentation tonight. This is what we're talking about. Part 1, a weed abatement program is born. And we won't go into the details of that picture. We'll see some better ones later. But it really kind of gets back to the question of, okay, we preserved Edgewood. Were the weeds there, or did they show up later? Well, the weeds were always there. Suzanne Sommers did amazing work documenting the flora of Edgewood. And this is a 1981 partial flora that she produced. I'm sure she had lists from earlier. But even at that point, a lot of the old, familiar, non-native faces are still there. Scarlet pimpernel, oats, Ballardia, cotoneaster, yellow star thistle is there, even then. And here we have a couple pictures of places that we're familiar with. The Carrick's Meadow, circa 1993, covered with teasel at that point. Looking into the Yampa Meadow, it's a little hard to see, but the foreground, the entire foreground of that photo, 1983, is very large, bristly ox tongues. Just west of the pedestrian underpass. Some of these photos are actually taken from the original, some of the original biological surveys that were prepared prior to proposing this as a golf course. They were looking for, say, San Francisco garter snakes, things like that. And some of these pictures show up. In this one in the upper right, there are a couple plants present. This is a little bit west of the underpass, so outside of the park proper, but you can see some bristly ox tongue. But on the right, just sort of poking in there, that's yellow star thistle. There's no way that you can mistake all those spines. So still present at that point. And another photo, I received this from Ken. I don't know who took this photo or where it was taken in the park, but on the back it does say Edgewood 1982, teasel obviously, but that sure looks like a lot of yellow star thistle skeletons as well. So the bad guys were there. And CNPS started to take notice. So I showed this March 81 article a little bit earlier that talked about conservation at Edgewood, but just at the bottom of that, 1981 for our chapter, invasive exotics, there is a concern about the problem of invasive exotic plants. Do you want to help? Do you want to get involved? Even then, the idea was getting started. Fast forward a few years to 1987, Brenda Butner is now part of the Edgewood Committee, along with a lot of other great names. You look at that list, 1987 on the Edgewood Committee. Brenda's there at the near the bottom as well. Jan Simpson is also part of that effort. And in 1988, a committee formed, Escaped Exotic Plant Control at Edgewood Park, trying to understand what we can do about that. Contact information, Brenda Butner. So she was there at the very beginning of the idea of even trying to do habitat restoration at Edgewood. Now, step forward just a little bit, 1988, there's a proposal from our chapter to the county for a weed abatement program. It was not signed, at least I haven't found a copy of it that was signed, but there must have been a signed copy of the letter that went in, because there's a response. And the response is from the county to Brenda Butner, Vice President. So she was the first person to officially approach the county on the chapter's behalf to propose this kind of program. And that was followed shortly by a little blurb in the November-December Blazing Star 1988, Escaped Exotics Control, Edgewood Park, November 19th. Contact Ellie Giamosis for time location. Did this actually happen? Does anybody know? I don't know if this even actually happened. There wasn't a permit at that point. Ken says it did happen. They actually did some work there. But it never happened again, at least not under the county, not under the chapter immediately. But what you do find is the following summer, July 89, a letter from Ellie Hess to the county asking for permission to work on fennel, broom, and teasel. And Ellie does get a permit. But that's not the whole story. There's actually a little legend that's involved here. I wish Ellie were here tonight so she could confirm this. But the story actually goes that before this letter was written, before this permit was issued, she saw the teasel. And she said, enough's enough. And she drew a line in her mind and on the ground, and she started working on it. And was cited by the county. She was cited by the county for doing work illegally without a permit at Edgewood. That was the impetus to make it official. Now, why was this issued to Ellie and not to our chapter? Now, Ellie later on in 2000 wrote a brief history of the program in which she indicated that there may have been a little bad blood between the county and our chapter because of the lawsuit, and maybe the county didn't want to give a permit to us. But Ellie was known to the county at that point. She was also very active with the Sierra Club. She was known by a lot of people, and she was able to get a permit. So the first 1989 permit lasted through end of 1989 was just for Ellie. But the following spring, in the Blazing Star, there's a blurb, Help Edgewood County Park Wildflowers. It's basically about helping with habitat restoration under Ellie Hess. This is in our Blazing Star. It must be under a new permit, ostensibly a CNPS permit at that point. I don't know for sure, but those are the very beginnings of the program. So, have permit, we'll weed. So there's Ellie Hess at the right, Ellie Hess, Weeder-in-Chief. Now at that point, as I said, teasel was present, not just in the Carex Meadow, but widely throughout the park. The picture on the left is actually got to be somewhere near the north end of Mow Site 1, just up from the service road. The picture in the bottom is a little bit northeast of the Carrick's Meadow in a swale. All of these areas had teasel. Lots of work done over the years to try to control that, and that was basically the first main focus of the program. And you zip forward many years, 2006. You see just a couple teasels in that photo. Nowadays, we practically never see it. It's pretty much gone. And so that's the first target and also one of the first major successes of the effort. Now, you see on the right, now we get into Issues of the Edgewood Explorer. That's the publication of Friends of Edgewood. And there's an article there, Who You Gonna Call? Weed Eradicators. That's by Bob Hess, Ellie's husband. That was an article in 1994. Teasel work is starting to tail off. So moving on to other targets, but there were many to choose from. As you read through the article, he talks about many of the other targets. There is one ominous line, though, at the very end of that article. We need a lot of people to get rid of the star thistle. Those are shades of many years to come. We'll come back to that story in a little bit. But even then, the idea was starting to form that was going to be the real challenge. So over the years, though, under Ellie's leadership, lots of great work was done. Weed wrench pulling of cotoneaster seedlings, Yampa Meadow. This is attacking English ivy near the day camp. Ellie Hess, I'm not sure who the person in the middle was. It had said John Allen, but I don't think that's John. Is it John Allen?
Yeah.
All right, so that's John Allen in the middle. On the right, Bob Young, Best Friend of Edgewood in 2005. Now, we'll come back to Best Friend Awards in a moment, but I wanted to mention them as I saw some of them. Best Friend of Edgewood is an award given by Friends of Edgewood for people who have really made an impact at the park, and Bob was one of the recipients of that. Some familiar faces here. Paul Heupel, John Allen, and Ranger Rick Munns removing Cape Ivy. Hasn't been seen since. Now, this was not dated. What year was?
That had to be around 99.
1999 that Cape Ivy was spotted just briefly and quickly eradicated, thank goodness, before it became widely established, and hasn't been seen since. On a wood rat's nest, yes. They had to very delicately remove that piece by piece without disturbing the wood rat. Ranger Sean, I don't even know how to pronounce that name, Wittishek, with adult French broom near the Carrick's Meadow. When was he a ranger, Ken? Do you remember?
Around 2000, 2002.
Early
Last,
2000s.
Permanent ranger at Edgewood.
Yeah, okay, last permanent ranger at Edgewood. We've had a great relationship with many of the county staff over the years, and that's been important to our program. Showing some of the change. Upper photo, 1996, lots of Italian thistle. Basically, you can see all the skeletons and plants present. 2003, after a number of years of treatment, all the flowers that you see are hayfield tarweed, or tar plant, as we say, rather than weed. An amazing transformation there, showing the value of all the work.
That's 7 years. That's amazing.
And it's not just about removing the weeds. This was a great thing. Ken had this on one of his display boards, this concept that you're trying to actually protect what's there. So in some cases, you still have, as we say, the elements present, and that's literally the seeds for what will regerminate and fill in the natives that you want. So here's an ethereal spear on the left, and if you look closely, you can see it's pretty much surrounded by Italian thistle, starting to drown under it. Same plant, lovingly, carefully protected, all the Italian thistle removed. Don't know where this was taken, but again, a fine example of the really detail-oriented, loving work done by so many of the weeders. Another great photo. Carol Hankermeyer removing ox tongue in the Carrick's Meadow, circa 1996. Carol was named a Best Friend of Edgewood in 1998, and I love that photo. It looks like you're having a good time in there, Carol. 1998 on the right, and this is near the West Kiosk, before and after treatment, getting all that ox tongue out of there. It's so important to get everything so that no seed drops and there are no reed sprouts. So it just shows, again, the detail level of work that's done by the group. So finally you get to 1995, and Ellie Hess This is the first year that the Best Friend of Edgewood Award is given by the Friends of Edgewood. And one of the first recipients, there were 2 that year. One of them is Ellie Hess. In that same issue, sadly, in that same issue, a memorial to Brenda Butner. That was the fall that she passed away finally after a long battle with cancer. The article by Carolyn Curtis was a very loving tribute to Brenda's involvement in starting the docent program. And in that same article is a report on the docent program by then docent coordinator Jan Simpson. Again, I'm just amazed at how these people have crossed paths over the years. And another article in that same issue by Ellie on the possibility of mowing to control yellow star thistle, a very important thing that we'll get to a little bit later. You move forward another 6 years, and this is after Ellie had retired from the program. She's no longer able to do the physical work, but was recognized by the Friends of Edgewood for all of her service for so long, leading the program for a decade, by naming a meadow in her honor, Ellie's Meadow at the far northwest corner of the park. In that same issue, dedicated weeder Roger Myers was named Best Friend of Edgewood for his work at a site that ever since has been known as Rogers Knoll. You get this theme that so much of the work we've done has been appreciated and recognized with various honors, including Best Friend of Edgewood. So that brings us to one of the main focuses of the program for much of its existence, the war on YST. Roger Myers, his work at Rogers Knoll, was focused on controlling yellow star thistle. And this is a picture, I took this picture when I was involved in the early 2000s. This is near the Four Trails Junction. That's a full-sized shovel. You can't see the lower half of it sticking out of all of that yellow star thistle. It was bad. Now that was recognized actually quite early on. It goes all the way back to 1994. Here's a letter proposing a renewal of the weeding permit. This was by Lori Hubbard, chapter president at the time, requesting the permit be issued to Ellie Hest. And if you read through it, it says, as you know, our past efforts have concentrated on thistle, but have recently expanded to include other invasive plants. The worst of these is yellow star thistle, which has become a serious threat at the preserve. So 1994, it's already being recognized that this is going to be a real problem. And a couple years later, 1996, in our Blazing Star, you see a couple very important developments in the battle to try to control yellow star. You see new board members. Ken Himes had been a president previously. He was actually a president before Bart O'Brien in the late when would that have been, Ken?
Well, actually, I followed Bart.
Oh, you followed Bart?
Yeah, 87, 88.
Okay, so 87, 88?
Right.
But at this point, past president, but we had a vacancy for escaped exotics, and Ken Himes and Don Thomas both stepped up. That was the point where that chair was split in two. There was such a large area that they split into a north and south. Ken became escaped exotics chair north. And then you look at the announcement for Edgewood weeding in that same issue, and Ken shows up. We now have, Ellie had always led a Friday morning crew. Ken added the Wednesday evening crew, and it's something that's been with us to this day. And I guess that was 1995. 1996 was when Ken actually coordinated a small experiment with the county. Very first experiment, trying yellow star mowing 50-foot by 50-foot plot. Although nothing really came of that right away. It was sort of an initial step in the right direction, but didn't really take off from there. But around that time, we see some new faces showing up. Again, this new blood helps reinvigorate the effort and refocus it towards yellow star. Here's Ken doing what Ken does so well, weeding and teaching amid almost a monoculture of yellow star thistle. That's 1998. Ken was named a Best Friend of Edgewood in 1996, 1 year after Ellie, the second year that that honor was awarded. I love this picture of Paul, 1998, just because I wasn't even sure that was Paul at first. It was like the picture of Tony earlier. He looked so young. I'm like, wow.
It makes you old doing this stuff.
Well, barehanding the YST like that will take some life out of you, that's for sure. And Don Thomas, even though he was escaped exotic south, there are many pictures of Don active at Edgewood, pulling Yellow Star, and most of them, in this case, 1998, working at Inspiration Heights. Now, one of the things that Ken brought was sort of a rigor around monitoring, doing data collection. He was very, very active about setting transects and density monitoring. Those were key elements of the program in the 1990s and the 2000s to show that we were getting results so that we could continue the work. And I'm just amazed by this chart. This, year 2000, plants removed. And Ken would talk about taking bags back to his house and counting and gathering the data. And you look at the list, there's got to be 30 or 40 different target species there of counted how many we removed in the year 2000. It's just, that chart alone is stunning to me to have that kind of data. We certainly don't have it today. It's something that we talk about, how do we actually measure the progress that we make. We don't have anything like this for current years. Again,
saved all the plants.
You may still have them pressed somewhere, actually. Who knows? One of the amazing things that came out of that kind of documentation was this specific record of death of a yellow star colony. This was on the left. It's amazing these photos exist. I think that's Don Thomas in the middle photograph at right. Was there for the very first treatment of this site at, they call it the Elderberry site. It's just downslope from Inspiration Heights. First time it was treated in 1996, and that's the entire first session right there, from nothing done yet at the top, in the middle of it, and at the bottom, just as sun is starting to set. A good day, good effort, 3 hours, done. I'm assuming the fourth person was the person taking the picture. Was that you, Ken? Yeah, so Ken was there as well. And so a record was then kept of that same site. How much effort did it take to control that site in the years ahead? So 1996, first year, 12 hours, 9 hours, 4 hours, 1.5, continuing. 2003, just 9 plants removed. That cannot have taken very long, although sometimes it takes a while to look for them. 2004, we couldn't find one. And we occasionally saw 1 or 2 pop up in subsequent years, but basically the site has been cleared. Now, what we found subsequent to that was things like Italian thistle coming in because there was no competition from Yellow Star anymore. So we still work at that site. But to see that it's doable, that was huge, to know that you could actually get rid of it. Unfortunately, that kind of manual effort just wasn't enough. So we get into the late 90s, end of an era, really the start of the war. Ellie officially retired in 1999. The weeding roster shrinks significantly. Many of the old Friday crew didn't carry forward after Ellie retired. So there was kind of a core crew that did continue on, worked with Ken. In the meantime, the late 90s, mid and late 90s, saw heavy rains, and the yellow star thistle just exploded at the park. And Ken worked like mad to try to deal with that. Took over the Fridays and continued them, added Tuesdays as well as the Wednesday session. There was actually a period of several years where we had Tuesday sessions as well. Ad hoc sessions, everything he could think of. But it was a losing proposition. YST eventually exceeded 75 acres at the park, and something more had to be done. The weeders alone just couldn't do it. So I do love this picture, though. This has got to be at the day camp parking lot. Ken and Paul and John Allen, part of the old guard that did carry forward. John was named a Best Friend of Edgewood in 2002. So 1999 was also a fateful year because that was the year that the seriousness of the YST problem was finally fully internalized. Friends of Edgewood and CNPS approach the county and say, we've got to up our game. So this is an article in fall of 1999 in the Edgewood Explorer. Friends recapture grasslands from yellow star thistle. That's after an amazing year. A year that saw CNPS and Friends of Edgewood convince the county to start a mowing program to try to control yellow star thistle. Huge volunteer effort to do the initial data collection and monitoring that was required before the mowing began so that they could track the results. Mow sites 1 and 2 established in June, totaling 6.5 acres. July is a TAC month, Saturday sessions the whole month long, in addition to all the regular sessions. Friends of Edgewood and CNPS, major call for volunteers, and people responded. There was a huge turnout. June through August stats, so 1/4 of the year, 3 months. 4 acres hand cleared of yellow star thistle. That's an amazing achievement. 474 hours worked, 275,000 plants removed, in addition to the mowing program itself. So this is a little bit of growing pains for the mowing program. You see some of the mowing getting started. This is what mow site 1 looks like after a mow. You see big cleared areas. Mow site 2 had a little bit of excitement around it. There was a little bit of a brush fire that got sparked. The blade of the mower hit a rock and caused a spark, and there was a little brush fire that was fortunately quickly extinguished. But a big learning experience for the county that was doing the mowing. In order to learn how to do it safely, they changed their equipment to avoid sparks in the future. Hand follow-up is so important for a program. You do the mowing, but then there are resprouts, and you got to have hand follow-up as well as spot treatment of areas that the mower couldn't quite get to. Here we see Kathy Corbols, a 2012 best friend of Edgewood, doing hand work. And then once we gather all that stuff, support from the county is critical to us, because we bag all of that and leave it by the service road, and it's the county that helps us by gathering that material and taking it away to compost it. So huge benefit we get from the county there for our volunteer effort. And I just want to talk, these are great charts here. There's a series of these. So these are hand-drawn by Ken, showing the progress of the YST program. So this is before mowing starts, 1998, manual removal only. You can see is that yellowish sort of color? Hand treatment only, striped areas, large areas that we just can't even get into. There's just too much. Come to 1999, we have mow site 1 and mow site 2. So the hand treatment has expanded a little bit, but the big gains are mow site 1 and mow site 2. Major advance for us. Followed by the year 2000, adding mow site 3, you see near the top. That's adjacent to Ellie's Meadow. And then you also see how the manual efforts have expanded significantly in the area of the Carrick's Meadow, Yampa Meadow, really starting to see us turn the tide somewhat, at least in terms of treatment. Whether or not it's actually getting rid of the plants, we don't know yet. But the treatment is finally covering some significant ground. And 2001, you see in the middle, we've added mow site 1.5 and Mule's Ears. Yampa Meadows has been treated. Ellie's Meadow, mow site 3 annex. Major gains. This was huge for us to see. This was before I was even involved, but I'm told it was huge for us to see that we could actually treat some of these areas. And you fast forward from there about 10 years to 2011. This is a graph that was produced by Crystal Nieder. The core areas of the park are all now listed as historic infestations. Now there are still plants there. It's at a very low level. We still have to go sweep those areas to try to pull them. But the core is now considered primarily historic. The last bastions are out near the Clarkia Trail. That's what Paul and his Friday crew has been pushing vigorously the last couple of years to try to get rid of the last of that. But the core of the park itself, we've gotten rid of the majority of it. It's an amazing accomplishment. But the question was, okay, you've treated it, but does it all, work? Well, here's a graph from some of the data collection that Ken and others had set up. 2001 to 2004, YST cover in treated areas, this is in some of the transects conducted, those treated areas, average cover decreased from 20.9% to 1.3% over the course of 3 to 4 years. So it worked. An amazing, amazing thing. But you don't really need to have the data sometimes. All you need to do is look. Picture's worth 1,000 words and then some. So this is a site near Four Trails. 2001, this is near where that shovel picture was taken at the beginning. Just incredibly dense yellow star. 2011, after the treatment here actually didn't start till the mid to late 2000s. By 2011, it's essentially yellow star free. We occasionally see plants here, but it's at a very, very low level.
I'm holding them.
Paul's holding what he picked. Now, how long do you think that took you to pull those, Paul?
Oh, quite a while.
It's just because you had to look for them, though.
I had to look for them.
Yeah, you had to look for them. The actual pulling was quite quick. Finding them is hard, but it's just, again, amazing to see the transformation that was possible by the combination of the mowing with the manual follow-up. So, a huge success story. One that's still ongoing, but you know, we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. We can see that someday Edgewood will be yellow star free. But that doesn't mean that we're done. And as we got into the 2000s and started to see that yellow star effort really turning the tide, we also started seeing other things that needed to be done. And so we get into the 2000s, new faces, new strategies, and start to see other things that have to happen. Now, summer 2001, another Ken Behind a Rock story. I have mine. I'm sure many of you have yours. I joined the program in 2001, and I met Ken. I was introduced to the program by a neighbor. Julie and I were. We had a neighbor, Wendy Phillips, who was occasionally a weeder and took us to the park and was showing us how special Edgewood was. And we were walking up the east side of Inspiration Heights in the switchbacks in the Serpentine area, and Wendy's telling us about this guy, Ken, who just knows everything. He's just an amazing person. And we're walking along, and there's rocks on that slope, and we're walking along, and you see something going on behind this rock, and suddenly this guy pops up. And Wendy says, "That's him." And there's Ken, and he's got weeds in his hand, and he's talking about Edgewood, and that was my first exposure to Ken, and one that will stick with me vividly. Now, I didn't have a picture of Ken behind a rock, but this is the kind of thing that you see a lot of times. Ken off trail, just being so enthusiastic about finding something and getting rid of it. And that image will stay with me forever. Now, that grew into a great and lasting friendship, too, so I'll always treasure that memory. New faces as well. This is a photo that was actually on the kiosk along the service road near Inspiration Heights. Took her weeding while she was here, and she was immortalized. Ken Himes as well. I'm not in the photo. I was there. I was somewhere on the other side of the Central Ridge. I was only there for 1 year, and Ken already had me roaming around, finding all kinds of stuff while he ran the main session. So I didn't make it in the photo, but I was there in spirit. New strategies. One of the things that I tried to focus on in my early involvement in the 2000s was adding more outreach and recruiting materials. We live and die by volunteers in our program, so we needed ways to encourage them and hold on to them. So I worked on things like the website and having a formal Weeders email mailing list, as well as new flyers, the business card, and then things like the kiosk sign, so we could leave a sign during a session at the kiosk for latecomers with a map to know where we were so they could find us. Or a trailside sign, so if we're working and somebody walks by and says, "What are those people doing in the meadow?" they can know what we're doing and maybe even grab a flyer. So just ways to try to get people to know what we're doing and maybe get involved themselves. Posters. This was some of the most fun that I had were the posters over the years. The Wanted poster in particular was a fan favorite. A lot of people have appreciated that over the years, and we've gotten a lot of volunteers that have come out because of that one. But also just a variety of, I found that if you had color and interest and changed it often enough so that people would look at it because it looked new, that would help draw attention to the program. ever-expanding types of sessions. Now, we didn't invent group sessions or Saturday sessions in the 2000s, but we certainly added more of them and continued that trend, had more leaders. Saturday sessions, once we reinstituted them on a regular basis, we did that primarily because it was an opportunity to reach out to Saturday park visitors. That's when people are at the park. So, here I am talking to people because that's the time when we can do outreach. GGNRA Big Year, this was a thing that was trying to raise awareness about endangered species and had a lot of habitat restoration efforts and a lot of familiar faces in there. Alf Fengler. On the right, you can see Jane Koss, one of the old guard, present at that session. Over on the right, Jane is here tonight. Over on the right, a 2004 session. I just wanted to mention Bill Corbles is at the far right. He's facing away, but that is Bill. I recognize that hat anywhere. 2004 best friend of Edgewood. Two people to the left of Bill, somebody that we're all familiar with, that's Kevin Bryant, who spent a lot of his early CNPS days up at Edgewood with us. It was a long drive for him to come up, but that was one of the places that we got to know him well. This is one of my favorite photos, Earth Day 2001. And this is at Rogers Knoll. I don't know if this is a Boy Scout troop or something. Ken, do you remember anything about this?
Yeah, I think it was.
A Boy Scout troop or a Cub Scout troop. You can see all the narrow-leaf mules there is at the front, and then just kids out there weeding. It was beautiful. I wish I could have been there myself. I started later that summer. I was not there in April. This is a little creepy for those of you who think Big Brother is watching you. Google has this thing called Street View. And I was thinking, with all these sessions and people out there so often, I wonder. And so I went and looked at Street View. And sure enough, you can see in the upper picture, the second car up, that's Ken's white Cadillac right there. And you got to go another 4 cars forward, that's Alf's car, right? So I recognize at least 2 of them. And then you back up a little bit, that's Paul's Prius there. So immortalized even on Google. They're there all the time. More adopted sites. So there were adopted sites. The Corporal's adopted site was one of the early ones, and obviously Roger Myers. We added a few more in the 2000s. Shell Corner, a place that I adopted near Rogers Knoll. First place that we actually documented tarantulas at the park. That was pretty cool. I had fun with that. Drewley Lane. That's Drew and Julie kind of merged together. This is an area actually just outside the underpass. This picture is very special to me because this was long before I adopted the site. This was one of my very inspirational photos. This is what really made me sort of dedicated to working at Edgewood, because this eventually became overrun by ryegrass, and and Yellow Star was on its way to overrunning this spot. And I couldn't let that happen, and that's when I adopted that spot. And I'm still working on trying. There's a long way to go to try to restore it. But this picture, for me, is just emblematic of what Edgewood should be and how special it is. And then Carolyn Dorsch's adopted site, 2004. That was a fun day. That was some of the buckbrush just getting started that season, and boy, what a beautiful, glorious day it was out there. And then Alf Fengler has an adopted site. I don't have a picture of his site, but I do have this picture of Alf in the Edgewood Explorer 2008 when he was named the best friend of Edgewood. Expanding sites and targets. So this is a map circa 2004 with lots of different work sites on it. And this is nothing compared to what we do today. You go another 7 years forward, and we've gone way beyond this. It's amazing how far the program has come over the years. And our target list has likewise expanded. This is circa 2012, over 75 species. We have even a few more now, unfortunately, because there's a few new ones we've found that we didn't know were there before. But just an amazing thing to work on so many different targets, so many different sites. The complexity of the program has just skyrocketed. So early detection and treatment, this is a really important thing for us. You'd think we would have learned that from YST, having known about it in the early days and then not really attacked it, and then it exploded before we could get a handle on it. We didn't quite learn it yet from that. One of the things that helped me learn that lesson, harding grass, so you have a picture here, 2003, harding grass along the Sylvan Trail. I don't remember it being present then in that density, but I wasn't paying attention to it then. But what I do find interesting is during a Saturday session that October, here we are out in the Carex meadow. You can see one of the guy with the hat bending over the tan shirt. That's Kevin Bryan again, another one of his visits out our way. But just in the foreground, in front of Kevin, just a few yards, you see sort of a lighter color, different from the other vegetation. I'm pretty darn sure that that's harding grass, the very beginning of the Carex meadow infestation, and we just didn't recognize what it was going to do. We didn't know the potential threat that it posed. It wasn't until several years later when Ken and I were up on top of the park out near Mow Site 2, we found harding grass out in the middle of the meadows at the top of the park. It shouldn't be there. It's an aquatic species. What in the world? Well, that sort of made me think, if it can do this here and it's a perennial, it can take over the whole darn park, and I'm not going to let that happen. And that was the beginning of an effort to try to control harding grass before it became another Italian thistle or another yellow star. And we started out in the early days, we would defer working on it because we were so busy with yellow star and Italian, so we would just leave it, but we would cut the heads because that way it wouldn't drop seed. And we'd come back later and dig it up. It's a perennial, you have to get the roots out. So we figured, okay, at least we're stopping it. We didn't realize, it took me several years to finally figure out that if you left the heads, even though the heads were still present, they dropped the seed before they shattered. So we were doing clipping, but not having anywhere near as much impact as we wanted. We eventually figured out, this is when you got to clip it, when it's just in flower. But we learned that lesson, and we applied it and started showing some more gains, and we started digging year by year by year by year. And that brings me to the photo that was in the Blazing Star for tonight's presentation. That colony in the Carex meadow eventually grew to be many meters across. It was very daunting, and we worked on it for years and years and years by hand. There was enough valuable habitat around it that we didn't want to disturb, so we worked on it by hand. 2012 was the first year that we actually had fully treated the whole darn thing, and that in my hand is the very last clump of that colony to be treated officially. Now it's still present, very low numbers, we have to go back, but this year I did that site myself in probably a half hour. So it's come a long way. And we'll keep at it. There's still more harding grass there, but like Yellow Star, we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. There's a lot more near the day camp, but we know how to do this one down. And that's part of our program, is trying to figure out how to do these things so that we can put that into practice and get rid of them. Now, having learned that lesson finally about get it before it gets to be a problem, now we keep our eyes open for anything new and try to get after it right away. And here are just some of the examples that we found, things that have shown up either on the border or occasionally one or two within the park. Things like narrow-leaf clover, Kixia earharta, yellow glandweed, that's Parenticellia, that's a very close relative of Billardia. You can see there's a little bit of Billardia actually mixed in with it. This was just outside the park near the Clarkia entrance. I worked on it for 2 to 3 years and only see occasional sporadic. It's along the entrance ramp to 280, and we're trying like mad to keep it from getting in the park. And then really nasty things like skeleton weed and stinkwort, which we occasionally see just on the outskirts of the park, or with stinkwort 1 or 2 occasionally inside the park, but we've kept them from being established yet. Fingers crossed. Keep that effort up. Keep it educational, keep it fun. I had a couple of the display boards here that Ken put together trying to do outreach. Alf has his Edgewood mystery photos. He sends out these emails with photos, and he doesn't tell you what they are, and some of them are really hard. Plants, animals, and says, hey, what are these? And, go ahead and see if you can figure it out. It's very educational. Botany breaks. We take these breaks during sessions occasionally and just talk about botany, about the plants we see, ecology, trying to educate our weeders, because an informed weeder is a better weeder. We have our own potluck every year since 2001. Thus far, it's always been at a different house, a record we hope to continue well into the future. Pub night after Wednesday sessions. We have this great tradition that adds the social element that really creates bonds that help strengthen the program. And special weeder field trips. Ken, Paul, and others occasionally lead trips, educational trips just for people who are on the weeding program to a lot of great places. There was one I remember a long time ago to San Bruno Mountain that was fantastic, and then one just recently this year to Arrastradero where Paul has been working with another program, but to show us how things looked in some ways a long time ago. There you still have some really bad infestations of things we've made good progress on, and it's a good way to show newer weeders this is why we do this work, because this is what it used to look like and what it would like if we didn't keep doing what we do. And all that work is so fantastic that Ken and Paul actually pulled it together into a presentation for Cal IPSI 2004 and presented on our program the successes we had and how that all worked with volunteers. So really wonderful stuff. Experimental plots. We've added a number of different experiments over the years. The top one is a relatively recent one. We're trying to figure out how the heck do we deal with oak grass. So you see some blocks there. That's downhill from Inspiration Heights. Another one that's near and dear to me is no-nons. No-non is no non-native. These are some small plots where we're trying to remove everything that's non-native and see what happens. And you can see it's pretty bare when you're in the middle of a mostly non-native dominated grassland, and you start pulling out everything that's non-native. It looks pretty bare, but interesting things are starting to happen there. A lot of the purple needlegrass, bunch grasses are starting to come in, but we're also seeing lots of clovers, a lot more different species of grasses, more flowers in higher density, certainly compared to the surrounding grasslands. A big change, and we hope to continue that for many years and see some great things happening there. So really an amazing program over the years, and that gets us to kind of where we are today. Now, I skimmed a lot in the 2000s. There's a lot that's going on, and like I said, I couldn't cover it all. But that gets us to where we are today, turning 25. Now, those boots aren't 25 years old. They are 12 years old. Those are the boots that I started wearing in 2001, and that'll be retired at the end of this year because there's one or two holes there. But that's what 12 years of weeding will do for you. So where are we at now, looking back after 25 years? Volunteer hours, we've seen a steady increase. The first one is actually kind of a blip because I couldn't find individual year records for before 1994, so that's a cumulative estimate, 1,500. There was a blurb about being at around 1,400 in the middle of that year, so I estimated 1,500. I also couldn't find records for 1997 or 98, so I estimated those. But you look at the trend, is just really amazing how we've been able to grow the program over the years. And if you look at cumulative hours, through 2012, 44,000. If you add in what we're likely to have this year, we're nearing 50,000 hours. That's roughly 25 person years of full-time restoration work. It's an amazing accomplishment and just a testament to the dedication of so many people who've put in so much effort. Examples of successes. These are targets significantly controlled, so we have nearly eliminated some things. Like I said, teasel is just about gone. Narrowleaf clover was a recent arrival, so it's in a very small area, but we want to keep it that way, and that we're nearing elimination. Functionally controlled are things that are still present, but no longer causing ecological damage. They're present at just a low level, and we continue to push and push. Yellow star thistle in the core of the park is in that category. Bull thistle and bristly oxtongue are both at very low levels at this point. Nearly functionally controlled, at least in the core of the park. Italian thistle, sow thistle, harding grass, they're still present. There are small pockets where they're dense enough to have an impact, but for the most part, we've knocked them down to very, very low levels. And things that we've not allowed to become established, things I mentioned earlier, like stinkwort, skeleton weed, subterranean clover. was a bad one that we didn't want to get established. That's out near the park, the main parking area. And then Dallas grass is one that Alf found in the pedestrian underpass on the Edgewood Trail just this year, and has worked diligently to try to knock out there before it gets into the park. But many challenges still remain. This is one of our big ones, tocolote, which is a close relative of yellow star thistle. While we were working on Italian in the spring and yellow star in the summer, this was building up because it's right in between the two, and we just never had the time. So this is built up significantly, and as we work on these things, we also see some interesting ecological things going on. This is a shell corner at my adoptive site on the right here. I noticed that tocolote heads were being utilized, whether it's the seeds or maybe grubs within the heads, are being utilized by rodents as food sources, and they're moving the heads around and sometimes caching them. They're distributing the seed, so in some ways the rodents are out of balance with the ecology, and that's leading to them distributing some of the stuff that we don't want. It's all a very complex equation. Now, I don't think that'll stop us from getting rid of tocolote long term, but it's just something else we have to factor into our equation. Grasses, though, you look to look forward. What's our future hold? We've made great progress on forbs. Grasses are something that we have huge problems with. Certainly in the meadows, grasses like Italian ryegrass, oats, purple false brome are huge problems, and we don't know yet fully what to do about them. Not yet. But there are some lesser widespread species that we are starting to work on with volunteers. Hedgehog dogtail. Ken has spent many years working on this himself, and we're trying to get more of the program behind that. Big quaking grass is something that we think is doable before it gets fully out of the bag, and we're just getting started on. Velvet grass and Medusa head are things that we've done some work on as volunteers, and that Crystal Niederer has also done a lot of work on with grant money. So we're getting started on that. We do have some other problems, though. Unfortunately, a pipeline does run through it. Actually, two of them. Two PG&E pipelines run through Edgewood County Park, pretty much right through the core of it. One of which is the infamous one that blew up in the big fire many years ago. And PG&E wants to work on those. This is a project, right? The photos here, this is a project that's just finishing. That hole has now been filled in, but it's an example. They did this work, and they did it on a portion of the property that was technically outside of the county property, and they were able to get permission from the San Francisco watershed to do this work. I know it's important work for safety, but we also need to keep in mind the impact that it's going to have on a place like Edgewood. So this was a relatively small project, but shows you the kind of thing that can happen. Next summer, they want to replace the one that, this stretch of the pipeline that had blown up in the big fire a few years back. They want to replace the whole thing through the core of the park, including through serpentine habitat, rare species habitat. It's a big deal. So we have some people working on it, folks like Stuart Weiss and Lenny Roberts and Friends of Edgewood. We've got some people who are working with the county trying to avert this, but this could require starting up the old coalitions again to try to prevent. Imagine a hole like this running from basically from here all the way to the Sunset entrance. That's what it would be. So we do have some challenges ahead of us, but I refuse to end my talk on that note. So I'm going to dive in here now a little bit. I've just got a little bit more to go, but I want to dive into some of the things that make weeding a joyous thing. Oftentimes you'll talk with people about how much work they did, but they also come back smiling. And why is that? That's because there are these kismet moments, these things that you don't anticipate, but that really just make you beam. Things like finding new plants for the plant list. You think from Suzanne Sommers all the way through so many great people, Tony Corelli and others, all the exploring and documenting that's been done. We know everything that's at Edgewood. We don't. There are still nuggets out there to be uncovered. A few of these Ken and I had the great fortune to find western pearl flower and the new subspecies of Microceras I found in 1 week back in 2012. Small flower Nemophila, we always suspected it was there, but just couldn't prove it. Ken found it during one session, and I was there with him and was able to photograph it. So we do still find these these new things, and it's just a wonderful experience to be able to do that. We also see a lot of wildlife, and it's just amazing to see, these great moments. The newborn fawn, Ken found this fawn near Ellie's Meadow, and we were just amazed at how still and quiet. I held out my camera at a distance to get a picture, and then we all backed away to not disturb it. But just what a treasure of a moment. The caterpillars we see, I love seeing the anise swallowtail. It's called the anise swallowtail. Anise isn't native, but the butterfly is. So what did it eat? Well, Yampa is one of the prime candidates, same family as anise, and here it is on Yampa because we've restored enough of Edgewood that there's enough Yampa present. Gopher near Ellie's Meadow. I love the frog just downstream from the frog pond, and then a couple times now we've seen these amazing sort of snake versus snake incidents. This was one of the first ones that we had. It's just astounding to see. And then sometimes it's just the beauty of the darn place. You never know what you're going to stumble on. And it's not just that it's an individual flower. Sometimes the scenery. I was out alone in the Carex Meadow in this September evening one time when it was raining. I was alone because it was raining. Nobody else was out there with me. But the sun was setting and the rain was backlit, and it was just, and the picture doesn't even do it justice. It was just an amazingly beautiful evening. The skunkweed, we think of it as being kind of stinky, which it is, but also very beautiful, especially backlit like this. This is on the edge of the Yampa Meadow, just this beautiful scene. And Kathy, amongst the marsh baccaris. Baccaris is not a terribly showy plant, but when it all goes off at once, like this, can be just quite lovely. And then just these amazing little unexpected surprises. These little globe lilies were growing completely out in the open. They still are. You can still go find them if you know where to look at the back of Mosaic 3. Not in the woods, not on a slope, but completely in the open, amongst the grasses, growing amongst the Linanthus. And I knew it was a special moment when I showed him to Ken, and Ken's like, I've never seen anything like that. I'm like, wow, you surprised Ken. That's saying something. So that's a real special place for me. And then this right here, you know where that shovel photo was taken? And later on there was one with the rangers and Paul that showed the difference in the yellow star. This was very close to that. It's basically part of the same yellow star colony. And I was there. This is when Ken still had me roaming about, and I was working on bull thistle. Yellow star was too dense to do anything about. But in amongst that, peeking up amongst all the yellow star, elegant tarflower just holding on and saying, save me. Please come back and save me. So I'm glad we were able to get back. So rays of hope for the future. Yes, there are things there to be saved. So, the Edgewood Weed Warriors. We've come so very far. We've still so very far to go. Not 25 years old, but 25 years young. And I like this picture showing the path leading on around the bend. Where will it take us? We don't know. So that's the story of the Edgewood Weed Warriors. And I do have a little bit more, though. I always have to have a little extra. So here's an epilogue. This is Suzanne Sommers. I was in touch with her in order to prepare this presentation. She lives up in Oregon now. She's actually going to be in town in a week or so. We're going to try to take her out to Edgewood and show her some of the old haunts. I've never met her before. This was the first contact that I'd ever had with her. But I asked her about some of her photos because her photos are priceless treasures. Legendary in their own right, but just priceless because of the record that they hold. And she was incredibly gracious and arranged to get some of her photos 40 miles into town to get them scanned and emailed to me so that I could use them tonight. And so I want to share. This is an amazing treasure. I'm thrilled to share this with you. This is 1990. That can't be right. No, actually, that's true. 1998, she told me. This was 1998 on the Triangle. So a more recent photo, but an example of really supreme, still intact serpentine habitat. Just, I won't even try to describe it. You can see it. just beautiful. On the other side of the coin, this is what spurred Suzanne to action, this sort of thing. This is the result of off-road vehicle abuse during the years between when the property was privately owned and when it was finally turned into a preserve. Those years of public ownership, there was very little property management. There was very little protection of the resource. And people just used it for joyriding and left horrible, horrible scars as a result. It looks hopeless. And yet, she took a picture from near the same place in 1995. Now, I've never seen it like this myself. I don't think if you went out there today you would see this because we've lost a lot to annual grasses. But in addition to the weeding program, our chapter also had a vegetation program that Suzanne was very much a part of and that Brenda was part of. And the restoration here and the recovery of the owl's clover coming in from surrounding areas was a result of some of that revegetation work. And it's just amazing to see. I'm going to go back. No, that's not good. And that's just amazing. And that's what we want to try to go back to. Again, that's why working on the grasses is so important to us, because we still think we can come back to that, even though we've lost so much of it to things like ryegrass. And then this is, I explained to Suzanne that this was going to be the Brenda Butner Memorial Lecture, and so she included this photo for me. I didn't ask for this. I didn't know that she had it or that she would send it, but it was just amazing to see at Edgewood, South Hill, Tony and Brenda working, and just apparently they were looking for harvest Brodia coronaria. We're looking for more examples of that, and obviously Suzanne was there too. She took the picture, so what a great sort of group of people out there trying to protect the park. Lastly, this is the poster photo. This is why I contacted her. I wanted to get a recent scan of that photo, because this has become we talk about vision statements. I mean, I actually have a vision statement. A few years back, we decided that our program, the Edgewood Weed Warriors, should have a mission statement and a vision statement. And I don't have both of them here tonight. I just have the vision statement. But in a lot of cases, we didn't have to have the statement. We had the poster. That was the vision. This has been the vision of what we think Edgewood was, should be, someday will be. And so I wasn't looking at this when I wrote the vision statement. I was thinking about other things in my head, and then came back to this poster and was amazed. So just to share with you, Edgewood, this is a vision statement is what things should look like if you've achieved your mission. So if we Weed Warriors have achieved our mission, this is our vision of what the landscape looks like. Edgewood stands as a shining example of the breathtaking beauty and diversity of the original native Bay Area landscape. At all times of year, through its thriving populations of rare plants, abundant wildflower meadows, cool and refreshing woodlands, and rich, varied shrublands, Edgewood fills those who visit it with awe and wonder, educates and enriches them as well, and ultimately, and this is key for remembering Brenda and Jan and everybody else, ultimately inspires them to action, to protect and restore such beauty and diversity themselves, both at Edgewood and beyond. That picture is what it's all about, what we're all about, much of our chapter history is about, and I thank all of you who had a part in it. Can we turn on the lights? Kevin, I see you're back there. This is the end of my presentation, but I just want to do one more thing.